It is time for some Victorian detectives by L.T. Meade. For Occult Detective October, which was the brainchild of MJ over at Reading This Alive, I read L.T. Meade's short story The Dead Hand. I found it in the novel, the short story collection L.T. Meade, a short story collection. More about that later on. So I read that for Occult Detective October, and I was curious what other short stories L.T. Meade had written. So I read the other detective stories in this novel as well. The first story is The Blue Laboratory. In this story we meet Madeline. And Madeline is a British young lady who travels to Russia, which was no mean feat for somebody, for a young lady at the end of the 19th century. But she travels to Russia to go to a Russian family, of which the father is a British Russian scientist. And she goes there to teach the daughters of the family English and other sorts of things. She befriends this scientist and he asks her if she wants to help him in his laboratory. So she does this, and this scientist says he has found a really important invention. He did an invention. So she helps him with his research and in his laboratory, and then she finds something horrific in the Blue Laboratory. And the story is very well written. The plot isn't that original, but the suspense and the pace of the story makes up for that. It is also really atmospherically written. It's an excellent story. Also fun is that L.T. Meade mentions Schopenhauer, and Schopenhauer was a real-life philosopher who lived, I think, in the first half of the 19th century. So the story is set in that period of time. I think this story was written at the end of the 19th century. Turn of the 19th century, I think. Anyway, I enjoyed this story very, very much. The second story is the Miss Cusack Mystery. And it is, what is it? The outside ledge. And Miss Florence Cusack is a renowned detective, and she helps the police. And in this case, the outside ledge, she helps discover a fraud, because this man, he wants to marry a friend of hers, and Miss Cusack is not going to allow that to happen, so she has to unmask this fraud. The plot is quite ingenious, the pacing is really excellent, the atmosphere is really good, there's not a lot of action going on, but hey, you know, women at the turn of the century, around 1900, they had to wear these long skirts and dresses and all kinds of underskirts, underdresses and undergarments, and you can't have a lot of action in wearing that. So you have to excuse it. It's really, she is more of a Sherlock Holmes detection kind of person. So I really enjoyed that. And I must say, this story is also available on audio on LibriVox. More about that later in this video. Then the third story is a Miss Marburg story. I read this story, it is an occult detective. I read this story for Occult Detective October, and it is The Dead Hand. Miss Marburg is a palm reader, but she's not an ordinary palm reader. She not only reads the lines of the people's palms, she can also see their future. And one day a man comes up to her and she reads his palm and she sees he is going to commit a murder. But at the time she can't do anything about it because she doesn't know who he's going to murder and what happens. Later on in the story, she gets asked by somebody to read some child's hand, the hand of a child. So she has to travel up to the house and she finds all sorts of things out when she is at this house. And she knows the man whom she read his hand earlier in this story, he has committed his murder. So it's not a whodunit, this story. We know who is the culprit. It's more of a howdunit. And it is a really ingenious plot. And there is suspense and atmosphere plenty in this story. So I highly enjoyed myself with that story. The Woman with the Hood is also an occult detective story because it involves a ghost. Dr. Bruce is new to a village. He just came to live in this small village. And one night he gets called to an old mansion and there is a sick girl. And this girl has, maybe a mental illness, he thinks. But he goes there and she tells him she sees a ghost. He doesn't see anything when the ghost appears to her. So he goes home but he is forced to solve the mystery of the ghost. I'm not going to say how he is forced to do that, but he does, and he solves the mystery. What I like about the story, the plot isn't really very original, but it is very atmospherically written. It is very well written, so I liked it very much. And what I particularly liked about the story, that at the ending of the story, I'm not going to say how it ends, but we as a reader know what happened, not exactly, but we get a glimpse of what happened exactly, but it isn't spelled out. So I like the idea that L.T. Meade respects her readers as intelligent enough people to figure out for themselves what has happened. So I like that very much. Mr. Bovey's Unexpected Will is another Florence Cusack mystery, also available on audio at LibriVox. And this story isn't a very suspenseful story. It's a bit of a strange story. This man has died, and in his will he mentions 3 men. And in the will, one of these men inherits a lot of gold. But he states he was a bit eccentric, this man. He states that the man must be weighed, and the gold must be weighed as well. And the weight of the man that comes closest to the same weight of the gold gets the gold. And of course, one man gets the gold. He unwisely travels with the gold to his house, and of course he gets mugged. So this is a whodunit. It's, well, like I said, it's not very suspenseful, but the plot is really entertaining and ingenious. It's really an entertaining plot. It's more like Miss Cusack is helping the police figure out what happened, and she is telling at the end how it happens and where the gold can be found. Via LibriVox, I did listen to an audiobook by L.T. Meade and Robert Eustace. And it is the Florence Cusack Mysteries. I enjoyed it very much, although I must admit I had to get used to listening, and I didn't make notes while listening because I was traveling at the same time, and at times I found it difficult to concentrate on the story because, well, traffic happens and you have to watch out where you're going. But I enjoyed it very much. Just aside, I'm wondering to the people, to you who also listen to audiobooks, do you make notes while listening to audiobooks? Do you have a way of annotating, or do you just remember when you make a review, if you make a review? Because I tend to not remember much about the stories when listening to audiobooks, I must admit. So I'm wondering, that aside, the best story I found in this collection was The Terrible Railway Ride. And it is suspenseful, it has a good plot, it has action, although the action isn't done by Miss Cusack because she's physically unable because of her clothing, of course. But she works with Dr. Lonsdale, and he does some really spectacular stuff in and on the train. It's really, really excellent. I thought that was the best story of the audiobook. I can highly recommend this audiobook via LibriVox. I will link the L.T. Meade A Short Story Collection novel and the link to the audiobook or LibriVox in the description box below. So, hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching.